Hi everyone, hope you're doing well. Nice to have you with me. I thought we would continue with the Psalms. We're not going to read every single Psalm obviously, but there's so many lines that are short and devotionally really helpful and not that hard to read. I thought we'd continue with the Psalms, and I expect we will for some time to come. I'd like to read Psalm 16 just a little bit with you. I love this psalm for many reasons. You get that lovely verse in that lovely line in verse 6, the lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. I don't suppose that anyone says that at every point in their life, but every one of us has said it at least once and hopefully more than once. It just so beautifully crystallizes that experience of being grateful to God for how He's disposed your life in ways that you can't control or anticipate, and how He's done it so beautifully. One thing that's striking to me about Psalm 16 is the very first line. Everything in the psalm is redolent of David's intimacy with God and how that affects him and enriches him right down to his roots. But the first line doesn't seem to fit very well, with that theme at least. Just briefly, the verse 1, Shomereni el ki chasiti vak. Just briefly, Shomereni, it's a 2ms cal imperative from shamar to guard. This may be a little bit confusing with the initial vowel there. You might have thought it's a 3ms cal perfect. Wouldn't make quite as much sense in context. He guarded me, God, for I have trusted in you. Just review Practical and Van Pelt if you can't remember this. When you get a cal imperative and you add a suffix, the first vowel will change to a comet sawtooth. So you actually pronounce this Shomreni ale. So guard me, O God, ki, because chasiti is a weak verb with a final hey, which has reverted to a yod because we have a consonantal ending, because it's just a cal verb, because I have trusted, vak, in you. So we get chasiti as a perfect, past tense, complete. The action is portrayed as complete. David has been trusting for a long time, and that's the reason why he asks to be guarded. Now, what's interesting to me about this shamar verb is everything else in this psalm seems entirely placid, happy, and safe. But David is asking for God to guard him. That's the kind of thing you ask in a psalm of lament when people are trying to kill you. I think Psalm 16 is valuable because it shows the happy flip side to lament. It shows where lament ultimately leads. When God answers a lament and guards the person who trusts in them, it's really wonderful. It's amazingly wonderful. And it's far more than just survival. Psalm 16 shows all the blessed results of what happens when someone trusts God through a time of lament. And the last 3 verses are especially striking, which I'd like to read with you. I'm going to read these out loud, and then you can have a chance to pause the video, pronounce them yourselves, and see how much you can translate. Verse 9, Laken samach lebi vayagel kavodi, af besarai yishkon lavetach. Verse 10, Ki lo ta'azov nashi lish ol, lo titain chasideka lirot shachat. And verse 11, Todieni orach chayim, sova semachot et paneka, ne'imot bimineka netzach. Okay, pause the video for just a second. Okay, verse 9. The first thing to notice, we begin with la kain, the word therefore. So verse 9 is drawing a conclusion from everything David has already said. In light of God's intimacy with David, what's true? And we notice right away we get ki beginning verse 10, which will give a reason why verse 9 is true. So the first clause of verse 9, la kain samach lebi, therefore my heart rejoices. Just a 3ms cal perfect verb. It's interesting, David could have had this in the imperfect for a continuous present or something like that. My heart keeps on rejoicing, but he portrays it from the outside as a completed whole. This isn't a joy. In other words, perhaps he's implying this isn't a joy that goes up and down. It's a settled, happy, constant joy in God. Vayagil, weak verb. Vayagel, I probably should have said. The root is gil with a cherek yod. It's reduced, and we get a consecutive imperfect, which is relatively rare in poetry, but it makes sense in context. My heart rejoices, and what's more, or what's next? Literally, my glory rejoices. This shows up occasionally in the Psalms where the word kavod, which always elsewhere is God's glory and not man's, occasionally in the Psalms you will get the word kavod to describe the human person. I think, this is doubtless poetic and, exaggerated, something like that, and yet true in its own way, that when God draws near to the human soul, it starts to reflect God's glory as a matter of lived experience, so that David can talk about his own glory rejoicing. Second clause off, also, another happy result of verses 1 through 8, Besari, my flesh, yishkon. Shakan means to dwell, just a 3ms cal imperfect, my flesh, and probably here, future, will dwell, lavetach, in security. Securely. A little adverbial phrase here. So we get heart with glory with flesh. From David's core to his glory, however exactly we define that, it's a little bit hard to put into words, but I think we understand it as a matter of principle and matter of experience. And David's flesh will dwell secure. His body is not incidental to this. His inner spiritual man, his inner man is being renewed day by day, to use Pauline language, but his body is going to be dwelling secure. Verse 9 is about joy in God's presence and security. Do we really want anything else out of life? Joy and security for both body and soul. It's quite beautiful. Why is David so secure in the here and now? Why does David look into his future and say, my flesh is going to be dwelling secure from here on out? Well, verse 10 gives the reason. Ki lo ta'azov nashi lish'ol, because you will not forsake, just a cow, 2ms imperfect, nafshi, my nefesh, lesheol, to Sheol. It's interesting we get forsake here. There's an abandonment in hell. I talk about this in my lectures, but Sheol, as far as I can tell, is the Old Testament word for hell. I don't think it's true in the Psalms that ancient Israelites thought everyone went to Sheol as a matter of course. That's obviously not true in this psalm, but elsewhere Sheol seems to be the place where people go under God's anger, and often the psalmists ask not to go there when they feel that they're under God's anger. Sheol is not a place of communion with God, and we see that here. Sheol's the place of abandonment by God. It's quite terrifying. But David is convinced this won't happen. Maybe that's the most important word in the clause. You will not abandon. This is understatement for effect. God has much more to do than just not abandoning David, but David hasn't gotten to that part yet. Then in the parallel clause, lo tetain, you will not give your chasid, your precious one, lirot, this is a cal infinitive construct from ra'ah, to see, and then shachat is the pit. It's a parallel term with Sheol. So from forsake to give, from nefesh to chasid, and then we get a little extra phrase here, to see the pit. Seeing in the Old Testament often implies more than just bare perception, and it often involves being baptized in the experience. So verse 10 provides the reason why David is so happy now, and it's the negative flip side, where the positive flip side occurs in verse 11. Far, far from abandoning David to Sheol, in the here and now, God will todieni. This is yada, it's a weak verb. The yod has reverted to a vav, and we get a long I vowel under the middle root letter. This is a hiphil, it's a 2ms imperfect with a 1cs suffix. You cause me to know, or you make known to me. Orach chayim. Orach is path. It's often used in parallel with derek. The path, it's in construct of life. You make known to me the path of life. So Sheol and life are opposites, obviously. You make known to me the path of life. And what's more, not just life, but sova, it's a noun form from sava, to be full. Sova semachot, fullness of joys, or fullness of pleasures, fullness of rejoicing, something like that. We'll just say fullness of joys. Et, sign of the direct object, and paneka, 2ms suffix on your face. So fullness of joys at your face. This is sign of the direct object, but in English we have to add a preposition. So fullness of joys before your presence. And then the parallel term, ne'emot, means something like sweetness. It's often translated pleasures, which is a good translation. pleasures, and then from face to right hand, your yamin is your right hand. Pleasures at your right hand, netzach, forever. So the third clause builds on the second by specifying from face to right hand. There's an ever deeper intimacy with God from his face to his right hand, and it adds forever, unendingly, never-endingly. So verses 10 and 12 build on each other by giving the negative side and the positive side as the reason why David rejoices now, because of what God is going to do someday in the eschaton. It's interesting, I've got a lot of writing here, let me change colors. We get 3 plural nouns. It's interesting, and we often translate, well, not every noun, but we often translate life as just a singular. In Hebrew, a plural noun can be a countable plural, or an intensification of something. Chayim seems like fullness of life. Samachot might mean very, many different kinds of joys, or it might just mean intense joy. The same could be said for ne'emot. So David rejoices now because of the life and the fullness of joy, the inexpressible joy that he's going to get at the end of his story.